That was Netanyahu's ultimate goal, was to de-link the Iranian front and the Lebanese front. The Gulf states came in, particularly Saudi Arabia, and I think they did an effective job of telling Trump that you cannot de-link these two fronts, that if you want to have any chance of the talks with Iran succeeding, you need to have a ceasefire in Lebanon.
Hey everyone, welcome back to MEE Live. My name is Mohamed Hashem. Donald Trump has announced that a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon has been extended by 3 weeks after Lebanese and Israeli envoys met face to face at the White House on Thursday. But on the ground, the picture tells a different story. Israel is still on Lebanese soil, still demolishing villages in the south, and still conducting strikes that have killed over 2,300 people since March. That includes journalist Amal Khalil, killed by an Israeli strike on the eve of these very talks. Now, Hezbollah has rejected the negotiations outright and says it will not be bound by any agreement reached without it. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed by Iran while the U.S. tightens its blockade of Iranian ports. Now, to help make sense of it all, I'm joined by my colleague, MEE journalist Sean Matthews, who's joining us from D.C. Sean, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Mohamed.
No, absolutely. Okay, Sean, let's start from that very beginning. You've heard what I said in the intro in terms of what's happening on the ground. So how do we make sense of this ceasefire announcement?
So this ceasefire, Mohammed, is the bare minimum that Trump needs to do in order to keep negotiations with Iran alive. We all remember when the U.S. and Iran struck their initial ceasefire, there was a big back and forth over whether Lebanon would be included in that agreement. So the Pakistanis had come out and said that the ceasefire between the two applies to all fronts, including Lebanon. The U.S. denied that as Israel continued to pummel Lebanon. And then in the subsequent days, we saw a rush by the U.S. to try to get the Israelis on board and stop their attacks on Lebanon. So for me, and in my discussions with U.S. and Gulf officials that I've been having, all of this is seen as really trying to preserve the negotiations between Iran and the U.S. Lebanon is kind of the key pebble in your shoe, one Gulf official told me, that could potentially derail those talks, at least from continuing.
And what does Lebanon actually have to bargain with here? I mean, critics will say that they don't have any leverage or deterrent, really. Is that a fair assessment from your view?
I mean, it's a very complicated situation for Lebanon, right? Because you have Hezbollah, which operates independently of the Lebanese state. Over the last 2 years, really since November 2024, the Lebanese government was trying to disarm Hezbollah, and they were trying to do that in a way that was with the consent of Lebanon, with Hezbollah and the Shia community that kind of sees that as a protector of their rights, sees it as a protector against Israeli aggression in the south. So we saw the Lebanese armed forces coming into southern Lebanon, and they made a very big show about trying to disarm Hezbollah, right? And even right before, I think, the U.S. War on Iran, the Lebanese government actually said that they had completed their task of disarming Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. That was an official statement from the Lebanese government. Clearly, I think a lot of watchers were surprised to see how well Hezbollah performed against Israel in this conflict so far, given the fact that the LAF had said that they were disarmed. So there's kind of a two-track approach right now in Lebanon, where you have on one side Hezbollah, which is not answering to the Lebanese government, which sees itself independently. And then you have the Lebanese government under President Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, who are leading these talks with the Israelis. Some in Lebanon would say that Hezbollah actually offers the Lebanese government some kind of leverage because they have shown that they can take the Israelis to task. Others in Lebanon would say that Hezbollah, is a detriment to the Lebanese state. It's operating outside of it, and it has drawn them in. So it's a very complex situation in Lebanon. And the Lebanese government is trying to sort all of that out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a couple things we're going to unpack just now, but let's start with, I guess, the significance of Hezbollah not being at the negotiating table.
Yeah, I mean, in my conversations, Mohammed, with U.S. officials and again with Gulf officials, and even some people who are in talks with members of the Lebanese government, no one was really surprised that Hezbollah would not be there. First of all, it's a logistics issue. So Hezbollah is a U.S. designated terrorist organization. it would be unlikely for Trump to invite them into the White House, right? Trump had a photo op with the Lebanese ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, the U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee to Israel yesterday. So there was just no way that Hezbollah would come into that talk. And again, I think what's happening in public very much is not what's happening in private. So I promise you, from my conversations with Gulf officials, there are furious messages being delivered between the U.S., Lebanese mediators, Hezbollah, the Lebanese Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri. He has close ties to Hezbollah. He's very close with. He's moved closer to Gulf states. He's a key intermediary. So I don't think Hezbollah not being at the table is really constraining these talks at all. Hezbollah, in effect, has the veto, on these discussions. Let's say, and a lot of people in the region are pretty confident that if Hezbollah didn't want these talks to proceed, they would not be proceeding.
Okay, and from your conversations with your sources, are there any fears that the tension resulting from these talks could ignite a internal crisis in Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean that is the worry, right? And Lebanon has a track record of this, right? So in the 1980s, we saw
Yep.
the Lebanese government kind of reach out to the Israelis, and then the Lebanese president was assassinated. So you definitely could see potentially a fissuring, and that's something that analysts, experts on Lebanon have been warning about for a long time, really since 2023, that we would see kind of a return to sectarian conflict, potentially and likely inflamed by the Israelis
Mhm.
between the Shia community, the Sunni community, and the Christian and Druze communities. And many believe that that's what Israel might want actually to achieve in Lebanon. So I think the task of the Lebanese government is very difficult here. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get the fighting to stop. They are trying to keep, Hezbollah in line to a certain extent with their limited leverage over Hezbollah. Because remember, the Lebanese government has limited leverage over Hezbollah, and they're trying to, at the same time, appease the U.S. Because what it looks like Trump really wants is some kind of a way to package this conflict, this wider conflict with Iran, into a win for his administration. And because of his focus on the Abraham Accords and this idea of normalization, there is a sense among U.S. officials and Arab officials that I'm speaking with that Lebanon is seen as something that could give Trump a win, right? He's already had this photo op in the White House with the Lebanese ambassador and the Israeli ambassador kind of standing behind him. And that is something that I think people are speculating could be Trump's win out of this debacle in the wider Middle East. So will Trump try to use Lebanon to kind of push normalization and claim that his administration achieved something, right, for his legacy, some kind of legacy defining event? Maybe he is looking at Lebanon to do that, which again poses deep risk for
Mhm.
Lebanon because normalization, it's not popular in Lebanon from what we've seen, and there is very much a risk of a sectarian conflict.
You bring up the Abraham Accords. I'll bring that up in a second, but this is one of the main sticking points of this whole situation, isn't it? I guess the inability of the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. Now, some analysts have pointed to the fact that Israel making this a requirement on peace or on a ceasefire or some sort of security agreement with Lebanon is actually a trap for the Lebanese government. How do you see it?
Well, look, I mean, I think if you go back to history, right, Hezbollah arose out of opposition to the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon, right? So I think it's pretty clear that as long as Israel remains in Lebanon and it occupies Lebanese territory, Hezbollah will have a reason to exist. And what I have also seen is some Lebanese analysts and even officials that I've spoken with who have said that potentially Hezbollah is the leverage that the Lebanese government has against Israel. And that is something that I didn't hear 6 months ago or 7 months ago. Again, it's a small minority of voices who are still deeply, deeply skeptical and critical of Hezbollah. But it's interesting that even among skeptics, that idea is being promoted that should the Lebanese government disarm Hezbollah, it will lose all of its leverage against Israel. The counterpoint to that, again, from the Lebanese perspective, from some in Lebanon, is that Hezbollah has dragged this impoverished Mediterranean country into a conflict with Israel that it did not want. That Hezbollah made the decision outside consultations with President Aoun, Nawaf Salam, the prime minister. So it's a very, very delicate dance.
Now, we've heard was it the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. who was hinting towards hoping to see Lebanon join the Abraham Accords?
Oh, I think that there is definitely a push underway within the administration to get as many countries as possible to sign on to the Abraham Accords. And I have been told this from multiple U.S. officials that
Hmm.
in every maneuver that you can expect this administration to be taking when it comes to Arab states vis-a-vis Israel, there is going to be in the back of their minds a push to deliver normalization deals. Trump's a deal maker. He wants deals. He wants to chalk up wins for what he believes is his greatest foreign policy achievement, which is the Abraham Accords. So I think it's hard not to look at the events from yesterday and not see the administration angling for some way to claim that they are expanding the Abraham Accords by bringing Lebanon and Israel together. What kind of form that takes, I think remains to be seen. But the motivation from the Trump administration is there, and they have this in mind. And again, what I've been told is that because the wider conflict in the Middle East has really engulfed the U.S. in this stalemate so far, and Trump is looking for a win, he's looking for something to deliver, there is a sense among some that he might see Lebanon as potentially a way for him to take some kind of a win. Whether that could blow up in his face is another story.
Okay, I also want to ask you about the role of Arab states, and this takes me actually to some reporting that you've done. And that report is that Saudi Arabia has actually been involved in efforts to boost Lebanon's hands in these negotiations. Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so last week there was a call, underreported call between Trump and Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And what I was told is that the Crown Prince urged Trump about the necessity of making sure that there was a ceasefire in Lebanon, that all of this had been, that there was preservation of these agreements, that the Lebanese are brought on board kind of into this. And basically, what the Saudis are very concerned about, the Saudis want the Strait of Hormuz opened. They want tensions in the Gulf de escalated. And the Saudis have told the Americans that there is a direct link between tensions with Iran, the conflict, and the Lebanese front, which clearly the Israelis were opposed to, because what the Israelis wanted to do was separate these two fronts, right? That was Netanyahu's ultimate goal, was to de-link the Iranian front and the Lebanese front. The Gulf states came in, particularly Saudi Arabia, and I think they did an effective job of telling Trump that you cannot de-link these two fronts, that if you want to have any chance of the talks with Iran succeeding, you need to have a ceasefire in Lebanon. And clearly we saw this extension of the ceasefire, which bodes well for the talks, at least a second round of talks between the U.S. and Iran and Pakistan. So yeah, the Gulf states have been very active in this. I should say, though, that also Saudi Arabia
Mhm.
senses an opportunity here, probably to sideline Iran and potentially to sideline Hezbollah. After the first ceasefire was signed between the Lebanese and the Israelis in 2024, there was there was kind of a push to get Saudi Arabia and Qatar invested into Lebanon to contribute to rebuilding and reconstruction. The election of Aoun as president of Lebanon really only occurred by bringing in members of Shia, Sunni, and Christian factions in support of him by dangling Gulf money for reconstruction in front of them. And that's something that the U.S. did. The Biden administration did that. None of that Gulf funding has materialized in Lebanon. And at the moment, it seems like it was a smart move by the Gulf states to hold off on doing that, because Israel has leveled southern Lebanon. So their reconstruction would have gone up in flames. But I think the Saudis do see still an opportunity to sideline Iran, which is a historic rival in Lebanon, and to probably boost their chances. They're very close to Nawaf Salam, and they're very close to Aoun also.
You were saying about Netanyahu wanting to de-link the two fronts, the Lebanese front and the Iranian front. I just quickly, Sean, because I think there'll be an interesting point to kind of explain to viewers, what is the significance from the Israeli perspective of de-linking these two fronts?
I mean, this has been Netanyahu's, kind of modus vivendi for years, right? It has been to always to isolate kind of different fronts, whether that is Gaza and the occupied West Bank, whether that is Lebanon and Iran. So basically, for Netanyahu, I think the idea would be that they could continue waging war in Lebanon. They could potentially, occupy vast swaths of southern Lebanon, which of course Netanyahu is under the pressure from right wingers in his government, the far right, to settle, to build settlements in. There's a kind of a military pressure there that they would kind of make this a no-go zone, totally pummel all the villages as they're doing right now, not allow any Lebanese to come back into southern Lebanon. And that's something that Netanyahu wants to preserve, that freedom of maneuver outside of any talks with the U.S. and Iran. Because Netanyahu, I think, and I've been told that the Israelis are very cognizant of the fact that the wider war with Iran is a debacle for the U.S. Trump is trying to get out of this stalemate. And for some breathing space, the Israelis might not be able to push Trump to continue attacking Iran. But the Lebanon file, which is much closer to home for the Israelis, is something that they want to control, much like they do the occupied West Bank, Gaza, and southwestern Syria.
Now, before I let you go, I want to make sure that we also talk about the US and Iran and all of this. Now, the recent thing is that Trump has said that Iran's leadership is in turmoil and that nobody knows who's in charge. And Iran actually responded to that statement by saying that there are no hardliners, there are no moderates, it's only Iranians and revolutionaries. Now, what do you make of the messaging on both those sides?
I think we have to look past some of the messaging, Mohammed, and just look at what's going on right now. The U.S. and Iran are locked in a stalemate of sorts, and the focal point of this conflict right now is the Strait of Hormuz, and it is the battle for control of the Strait of Hormuz. So I would say, kind of while the messaging can be important, it can offer clues. Everybody should be watching what the Iranians and the U.S. are doing in the Strait of Hormuz. Both sides are trying to assert their control over that strategic waterway. I was talking with a shipping industry source in Europe just before I came on the show, and a lot in the shipping industry are noting that Iranian-linked vessels are still making their way out of the Strait of Hormuz, and in many cases, some cases, outside the Gulf of Oman, where U.S. warships are stationed to impose a blockade. So, from the shipping industry perspective, what I was told, kind of quote unquote, is that Iran remains in control of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. has tried to break that control by imposing their own blockade on Iran, and what they're trying to do is, not only stop Iranian ships from leaving the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman, but we've seen these interdictions in the Indian Ocean, where where the U.S. is seizing these Iranian vessels, basically, right? All of this is being done because Iran and the U.S. are competing for this strategic waterway. So again, I would look past the messaging and I would look at what is going on in Hormuz and this battle between the blockades. And that is where the stalemate is right now.
And what about the messaging coming out of Israel? Because Israel is saying it's ready to return to war. Given everything that you just said about the Strait of Hormuz and given what Israel is saying, I mean, how close is this? Are we coming to this all blowing up again, really?
I think both sides, and this is what I've been told, and I think our reporting points to this, and a lot of the reporting that we've seen in kind of recent days kind of confirms a lot of Middle East Eye's earlier reporting, is that both sides still need a ceasefire. We've done a lot of reporting about kind of the support that the Iranians are receiving from the Chinese. In the onset of the war, we reported that the Chinese had delivered drones to Iran, that they'd also delivered surface-to-air missile interceptors to the Iranians. And I think Iran does need to kind of regroup. They need to kind of bolster their defenses. And the U.S. probably even more so. Remember, the U.S. has run through thousands of Patriot missile interceptors, Standard Missile 3 interceptors. So the U.S. might not be in a position to resume this war with its Gulf allies exposed and potentially also with Israel exposed. There's a report also that I think confirms some of our earlier reporting in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, which said that the U.S. now might have to reassess its plans to defend Taiwan in the Pacific because it has exhausted so many of its ballistic missile interceptors. Within the first 2 weeks of the war, we reported that the U.S. was running low on these interceptors. So again, I think there's a lot of posturing going on, but the military realities, both sides are assessing those right now during the ceasefire, and they're trying to rebuild, they're trying to regroup.
And what hopes do we have for fresh talks in Islamabad between the U.S. and Iran, given everything that we just discussed?
Well, the Pakistanis came out today and said that they are making progress on trying to get the two sides together. There's a U.S. security detail actually in Islamabad, Bloomberg reported, that's kind of laying the groundwork for U.S. officials to come. I think, again, to kind of go with what we had said at the onset of these discussions, that Lebanon is that pebble in your shoe that could derail these talks. The fact that the U.S. has extended the ceasefire in Lebanon for 3 weeks at the behest of Gulf states, obviously, very clearly, shows that the U.S. is trying to keep these negotiations with Iran alive, right? I think if that ceasefire had not been extended, even despite the Israeli violations of it and the destruction that Israel is conducting in southern Lebanon, had that ceasefire not been extended, right, it would make it much more harder for the U.S. and Iran to come together because the Iranians have linked those two fronts. So again, that is one telltale sign that there could be progress towards talks. But again, there really is this stalemate, and I want to go back to the Strait of Hormuz because watch what is going on there. Watch the U.S. interdictions of alleged Iranian vessels. Watch Iran's interdiction of vessels. This week the Iranians took two vessels into their territorial waters, a Greek and a Geneva-owned vessel. So the Iranians are trying to assert their dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. is trying to counter that by asserting its dominance with this blockade, which many in the shipping industry that I speak with are not buying. They're not buying into the U.S. narrative. But again, watch the Strait of Hormuz because right now both sides are trying to position themselves around that for leverage in what appears to be upcoming talks in Islamabad.
And we'll leave it here. Sean Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you so much to our viewers as well. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mohammed.